Good evening and welcome to our students, faculty, staff, alumni, and friends. It's wonderful to see so many of you here for tonight's Wellesley Votes conversations, and for those of you in the Boston area, I hope you've survived this terrible windstorm. We want to welcome you to this discussion about the evolution of the Black Lives Matter movement and how people of color are mobilizing around the election to fight systemic racism and make change, with GBH host and commentator Callie Crossley, who will be moderating the event, Massachusetts State Representative Liz Miranda, and our very own Kelly Carter Jackson, Knopfel Assistant Professor of Humanities and Assistant Professor of Africana Studies. I'm so pleased to share that both Callie and Representative Miranda are proud Wellesley alumni. The discussion is part of our broader ongoing Wellesley Votes initiative, a nonpartisan campus-wide effort we launched earlier this year. This fall, through Wellesley Votes, we're bringing together academics and activists, organizers and researchers to spark community conversations with students, staff, and faculty on some of the key issues that are on the ballots and on the minds of voters in less than 30 days. It is my hope that through tonight's discussion and others, we'll explore our shared commitment to democracy, something that we each have a stake in upholding through active citizenship, culminating but not ending in our participation in this November's historic election. I've long believed that Wellesley has an essential role to play as we confront some of the most pressing concerns we face in this moment, both in this country and around the world. Tonight, let us again to commit to work together as a community to envision the world in which we want to live and to take action together to make it real. I'm pleased to welcome Callie Crossley and Representative Liz Miranda back to Wellesley, and to welcome Professor Kelly Carter Jackson to tonight's discussion at such a critical moment in our country's ongoing fight against systemic racism, when so much feels uncertain and so much seems possible. Their voices are ones that are essential for us to hear. Callie Crossley is an award-winning journalist, documentary filmmaker, and radio and TV host. She has received a National Emmy, an Associated Press Award, an Edward R. Murrow Award, and a Clarion Award, as well as top honors for commentary from public radio news directors, and among so many more. Callie brings her brilliant assessment of the issues of the time to us on Monday morning on GBH's Morning Edition and WGBH TV's Beat the Press. And she's the host of Basic Black, which is really the definitive show on current events concerning communities of color. Representative Elizabeth, Liz, as we love to call her, Miranda, is an activist, educator, former nonprofit executive, and community organizer. She currently serves as the Massachusetts State Representative for the 5th Suffolk District, which comprises parts of the Dorchester and Roxbury neighborhoods of Boston. A first-generation Cape Verdean American and a lifelong Roxbury resident, she has spent her entire life in the district that she now represents. As a state legislator, she sits on the joint committees on the Judiciary, Community Development and Small Business, Public Safety and Homeland Security, and Veterans and Federal Affairs. She's a member of the Massachusetts Black and Latino Legislative Caucus and a staunch advocate for gun violence prevention, environmental justice, economic empowerment, and for women and girls of color. Professor Kelly Carter Jackson is Wellesley's Knopfel Assistant Professor of Humanities and Assistant Professor of Africana Studies. Her deeply interdisciplinary scholarship focuses on slavery and the abolitionists, violence as a political discourse, historical film, and Black women's history. Her recently published award-winning book, Force and Freedom, Black Abolitionists and the Politics of Violence, examines the conditions that led some Black abolitionists to believe slavery might only be abolished by violent force. Her book was recently awarded the prestigious Frederick Douglass Book Prize. Professor Carter Jackson's essays have been featured in The Atlantic, Quartz, The Conversation, and she is frequently interviewed in the media, including on Basic Black with Callie Crossley. Callie, Liz, and Kelly, it's truly such a pleasure and an honor to welcome you.
Thank you, President Johnson. Black Lives and Black Votes, Election 2020 and Beyond is our topic. And any conversation about Black lives and Black votes in this moment, we must pause to take a moment of acknowledgement for Breonna Taylor. So I'm going to ask both Professor Carter and Representative Miranda to give me some brief comments before we move on into our discussion. Kelly?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me here on this wonderful and exciting panel. Thank you for the people that we can't see, but we know that are watching. This is a really momentous occasion and a really timely event, and I'm so grateful that we stopped to pause and really say Breonna Taylor's name. I think that it's very easy for Black women to be forgotten in a movement that really centers around a lot of violence towards women as well. And so while Breonna Taylor has not yet received justice, we are still fighting for her. We are still advocating for her. And I think one of the greatest weapons that we can use in ensuring that she gets justice is making sure that her memory doesn't die and making sure that her name is remembered in all aspects. So so for that, I say thank you for saying her name and bringing her up. And I hope that we can all continue to fight to make sure that her family receives the justice that she deserves.
Liz?
Good evening, everyone. Like Kelly, I just want to say how much of an honor it is to be with you, both Kelly and Professor Carter Jackson and you, Kelly. When I walked on the campus of Wellesley in 1998, I was very much a very similar girl like Breonna Taylor, coming from a very similar community. And it's an honor today to be uplifting her name, but also uplifting the over 110 people a year who die based on police violence through no-knock warrants, including 7-year-old Amari Jeffries, and all the women. We heard about Sandra Bland, Atiana Jefferson, Rakia Boyd, and I could spend literally an hour going through the names of the other sisters who have died and not received the acknowledgement and justice because Black women are often unseen and unheard in the backbones of many movements, but not on the front. Are on the front lines, but not getting the frontline recognition. And I think it's an important moment not only to hold space for her. I held space for her also on the front steps of the State House and also in the chamber, because we want people to realize that it is not if this will happen again, it's when it will happen again. And so our voices, our votes really determine what justice looks like for Black women. So thank you for holding space for her. Because in holding space for Breonna, we're holding space for the 400 years of the brutalization and degradation of Black women in this country.
Thank you both for that. So as a news person, I have to put some news context in our conversation, so let me raise this up. You know, we're in a triple pandemic, or folks of color, particularly Black folks, are in a triple pandemic. There's an economic free fall. There is the COVID-19 pandemic, where the highest rates are among folks of color. And then, of course, there is the racial reckoning that was in the streets and continues to be in the streets. But specifically right now, there's racial profiling right here in Boston. ICE agents illegally stopping a West Roxbury jogger, a Black man. He refused to answer their questions and they let him go, but we know that could have gone a different way. People are in the streets protesting Jonathan Price, a Black man killed while trying to stop a fight in Wolf City, Texas. And again, the COVID cases are spiking right now, and the people of color still make up the highest numbers of victims. We should point out some of those people are working in the White House right now because the commander-in-chief is ill with the disease. Later tonight, a Black woman and a woman of Asian descent will take the stage in a debate against Mike Pence. That's Senator Kamala Harris, and that's a big deal. First time on a national ticket. So if there was ever a moment to talk about a movement for Black lives playing a critical role in this election season, it's now. And we've shortened the name to Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter folks call it the Movement for Black Lives. So I just want to put that out there. People know that organization for mostly being in the streets, but there's so much more to it. Let's begin by noting that it was founded by 3 Black women, 3 Black queer women. That's it. That's important to say. Inevitably, when we start talking about Black Lives Matter and its evolution, Kelly Carter Jackson, the comparison goes to the 1960s and that movement, that civil rights movement, which I refer to still as a modern civil rights movement. And sometimes people say these are 2 separate entities. What's happening with Black Lives Matter has nothing to do with what happened in the 60s. I, however, say that this is part of a continuum of an ongoing struggle. And I wish if you would put this in the historical and contextual context that it needs.
Sure, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to take it back even further. So I think that we are, you know, I study the abolitionists, and to me, when I think about the abolitionist movement and its goal to push not just emancipation, which was a first step, but equality, we are still fighting for that. One of the quotes I use a lot in my classes is from 1837 from Joshua Easton, and he says that if we don't, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says, if we don't overturn the institution of slavery, that's one thing. But if you don't deal with the spirit of slavery, that's quite another. And he's basically saying you can abolish slavery, but if you still have the spirit of slavery, which is anti-Blackness, that we'll still be fighting these battles over and over again. And I think that we've seen these battles throughout the 19th century, in the early 20th century, throughout the long freedom struggle, up until today. There are different reincarnations. It's evolved, certainly, but the call for equal justice, the call for Black humanity, the fight against white supremacy is ongoing and has been so for the past 400 years. So I don't think that it's necessarily different, at least in terms of its themes or ideas for full Black humanity and citizenship. But I do think that some of the strategies and approaches have changed to meet the cultural times, for sure. But, you know, and my mother marched in the 60s, and the things that she experienced are not that far off from what activists today are experiencing when they march and when they protest.
Liz?
You know, I'm going to take it to Massachusetts. And, you know, one of the things is I was elected in 2018, November 18. It was a historic day here in Massachusetts where 4 African-American women were elected, 2 state legislators, myself and Representative Nika Elugardo. We had a Black DA for the first time and a woman, Rachel Rollins, and we had our first Black Congresswoman in Ayanna Pressley. And Massachusetts plays an interesting role, you know, to Kelly's point about abolition. Massachusetts, you know, the founding of this government in 1636 was the founding of the government of the nation. You know, many of the forefathers of Massachusetts, you talk about the Adams family, the Hancocks, these are all men who went on to nationally shape the documents that govern our freedom, our democracy, the 13 colonies, and then eventually this entire nation. And what you have, it also is the first state that had slavery. You know, we had a merchant industry and a sailing industry that built many of the boats that transported Africans and indigenous people across this country. And so it's really interesting to me that because people are not students of history, and sometimes history is incredibly painful, that folks do not want to go back in history to understand that it is very much a continuum. This is very much our civil rights movement of our time. If you think about the 50s and 60s, being a very pivotal moment for the children of today and the generation ahead of it, and even the generation before that, 50 to 60 years post some of these momentous movements across the country with the freedom rides, when you have the boycotts, This is their movement. This is what they know. We do not teach a really inclusive history in this country where we're learning about people beyond Dr. King and Rosa Parks. You know, there were thousands of people who not only marched, but had different roles. And I think this moment in time, and shout out to those 3 women, often they are, you know, there's one of them who wrote a book around being called the terrorists, and that the idea to fight for human dignity and freedom and justice, and I would take it a step further from equality to equity, is something seen very dangerous in this country. Even the words white supremacy, even when it's spoken in the halls of government or in corporations, is seen as something. So it is our movement. It is a continuum. We all have a role to play, and the roles are different. Some people will protest. Some people will legislate. Some people will write. And some people will speak out against these injustices, just like they did in the abolitionist times, but also what we saw in the 50s and 60s in this country.
So 2 things. First, that's Patrisse Cullors' book. It's When They Call You a Terrorist. And I should mention that you were talking about the winning of the 4 Black women in Massachusetts. You beat 3 men in the primary, we should say, before you went on to the final to have your victory. So that should be noted.
Wellesley taught me well. Wellesley taught me well.
Exactly. So one of the things that you ran on was really about engaging young people in this discussion, and particularly young people of color, because there is a lot at stake you wanted them to understand. Let's talk a little bit about what's at stake in this election right now. We can look at it through the lens of the Black Lives Matter movement, where a lot of young people are engaged now. And again, understanding that Black Lives Matter, and I'm using the shorthand, is not just what's happening in the streets. It's not just about policing policies, though that is huge. But a huge part of what they are doing in this moment is actually voting and registration. They're registering people at rallies. They're registering people online everywhere. And they have an electoral justice project, which they are very much enthused about. So when we talk about Black Lives Matter and the organizations underneath it, voting is very important. And yet, to both of you, there's always been an ongoing conversation about, for folks of color particularly, since we're not always successful in getting what takes care of our needs, what is my vote worth? Why should a person of color be engaged at this moment? Kelly, give me some history about why it's important and why it continues to be important.
I mean, you know, I say this all the time. People died. People died so that we could get the right to vote. So I take it incredibly seriously, even if I'm not, you know, 100% enthused about the candidates. I take it very, very seriously. Because people's lives are on the line. People's literally lives and livelihood are on the ballot when we go to vote. And so, you know, my biggest thing has been really helping to fight voter suppression. So I think it's incredibly important to get the vote out, but also to combat the ways in which votes get suppressed. So, you know, a lot of pundits have said this as well, that, you know, this election will not necessarily depend on who gets the most votes, but who's able to suppress the vote in one particular direction so that people are not completely franchised. So I think when we look at, you know, the long history of voting, and we can take that back to the 15th Amendment, when Black men were first given the right to vote. In this particular year, you know, 2020, we're talking about the 100th anniversary of women's rights to vote. But I often, you know, have the caveat where I say white women were voting in 1920, Black women don't get the right to vote until 1965. If you're a Black woman living in the South, for sure. And so there's a long history of voter suppression in this country, and yet an equally long history of Black people and people of color pushing for their voting rights. And so I'm always, you know, sort of impressed, and I think thrilled when I see how people are getting energized about making sure that their vote counts. And so, yes, Black Lives Matter is absolutely doing more than just talking about police brutality. Who votes in the sheriff? Who votes in the AG? who votes in, our elected officials that will make decisions on our behalf, not just at the presidential level, but local politics are so important, and making sure that people are informed about who's going to have control over their local, state and national, policy is just really important. So yes, voting is incredibly important. There's a long history of our need to get the vote out, and our need to combat voter suppression.
So Liz, I want you to speak to that as well, but I should note, following up what Kelly said, that in Ferguson, Missouri, where people will remember that's where Michael Brown was killed by Officer Darren Wilson, the prosecutor there was targeted by Black Lives Matter voting folks who got the community engaged, registered, and voted him out. And the first Black prosecutor now holds that role. So there's a clear example of what happens when there is mobilizing a vote that sometimes people take for granted. So let's talk about voter suppression, Liz.
Cori Bush, Missouri, is going to have a very active and a very progressive person coming out of there to represent them.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned running against, 3 men. It was actually, 4.
Okay.
And one of the things that, what I learned in running for office is that people have a lot of righteous anger. And when you have not been seen or heard, you've been degraded, you've been brutalized, you've been mass incarcerated, you've been over-policed, you've been undereducated. In my district, the median income is $24,000. In Boston, you need $52,000 at least to survive. So there are people literally living in community, barely surviving. And I won every ward and precinct, and I set a record of over 10,000 people voting, because we don't have a registration problem necessarily in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have a voter turnout problem. And one of the reasons why is because suppression, folks sort of had this image of that voter suppression is someone standing there blocking the polling booth, but suppression looks like lack of transportation. Lack of language access. Over 52% of the people who live in my district speak another language and are foreign born. Literacy. There are many people that cannot read ballots. If they're elders and they come from different countries, they don't understand the voting process. And even for able-bodied, English-speaking folks, the voting process is still hard. And in my election, I knew that as a homegirl, for my community, that I would have to do more. And so people would tell me to focus on super voters because, hey, why not focus on the same people who vote all the time? And I said, no, I wanna know where 2008 voters have gone, where 2012 voters have gone, where recent 18-year-olds, where are they? And so I went to bodegas, I went to laundromats, I went to street corners. And what I used with my brothers and sisters on those street corners and those bodegas and those laundromats was that local politics really matters. State legislatures across the country are predominantly male and predominantly white. Even in Massachusetts, we just finally reached 28% of women in the state legislature. And it wasn't until 1973 until a Black woman was elected to our government here when we started in 1636, and we're such a liberal blue state. And so what I tried to teach them on those corners was that voting is your love and your power, and that it is an action. And that if we don't do the action thing, and voting is just one part, and folks are saying, well, voting, my vote doesn't matter, it doesn't get counted. We had a lot of returning citizens to our city who didn't know that they had the right to vote, because we do not disenfranchise when you're out of a house of correction or DOC facility here in Massachusetts. And so folks did not even know that they could vote. And so I just use the perspective is that, we have to expand the electorate here and in all states across the country. We have to value each citizen, naturalized and born in this country, to know that this vote is not just you going into a polling booth for 2 minutes. It is your love for this country and your community and your family. And I would argue that it also is life or death in this moment, When you have a federal government that has impacted immigration laws, has impacted how we responded to COVID, that disproportionately killed people in our community. I lost my beloved grandmother in April and was sick. We don't have the luxury to stand on the sidelines in this election. And so just reframing the narrative that folks matter and that their vote is putting into action how they feel about this country and their community, and trying to salvage whatever dignity they have for their family. I found that people went to the polls in droves just because someone saw them and heard them.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of reframing the narrative, let's talk about Black women and the roles that they're playing, certainly this year, but have been playing for some time. Back in 2018, as we know, the same time that a number of women were swept, Democratic women were swept into Congress, a lot of women of color were, and folks worked very hard. A lot of Black women worked very hard to get them in those positions. And they went to the head of the Democratic Party and said, we're not getting the feedback, the kind of respect commensurate with the power that we bring with our ballot. And so there's been a lot of discussions out there. We see more Black women out front in doing these things. They've made it plain that they intend to use their power as a block if they need to, even though I need to say that Black voters are not a block, but I know folks don't believe that. But let's talk about Black women mobilizing and their importance in this moment. Kelly, you can start.
Sure. So once again, the historian, I got to go back. so because I want
here for.
I want people to know that there's a rich history that really starts with Black women, that Sojourner Truth, the abolitionist and activist, is the first woman speaking at a national convention long before Susan B. Anthony, long before Elizabeth Cady Stanton. You know, they weren't present at the first convention, and she's talking about women's suffrage, and she's talking about equality. Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell and Anna Julia Cooper. These are all Black women that were doing the hard work of creating, you know, a political system that benefited them and that advocated for them and that spoke to their needs. And so we just have a long, rich history of Black women who have been doing this work. It could be argued that Black women are the Democratic Party, that we have.
Well, that a lot of people say that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe Biden has us to thank for his candidacy, and a lot of other candidates can thank Black women for their candidacies as well. So we have this rich history of activism, not just in putting up candidates, but bringing people to the polls. Like, Black women have also been responsible for saying, like, not just I voted, but you vote and you vote and you vote, and we bring communities with us to do that work. So I think centering the needs of Black women is incredibly important, especially when we think about what's at stake in terms of public health. You know, Black women have some of the lowest outcomes when we think about public health, when we think about this virus, when we think about maternal mortality and infant mortality among Black women. There are so many issues that we have that, you know, are life and death. And so our voices have to be at the table in a meaningful, substantive way, not just symbolic, but in ways that really create leverage and create change for those who are at the socioeconomic bottom and the political bottom. So I can't understate that enough. And then I forgot the second part of your question.
Well, how do they realize the political power that should be commensurate with what they're bringing? So how do they realize some movement even in the party or elsewhere, because they're bringing a lot of heat? They're bringing it. They're bringing the voters.
What's encouraging to me is to see that Black women are bringing this heat in all directions. So you're seeing it in the local politics, you're seeing it in state politics, but I think you're also seeing it among CEOs, You're also seeing it among college presidents. Thank you, Paula Johnson. You're also seeing this among, academics, a lot of my colleagues included, who are doing this work to try to say, how can we create a better society, a better community, that when we benefit Black women, everybody benefits. Everybody benefits. Black women are the gateway to getting everyone something. I think there are other groups that get targeted, that there is no trickle down, but with Black women, we can show statistically how when Black women get catered to, their whole community's needs get met. And so in this moment, I'm encouraged because I see that happening at all different levels. I see this happening in corporate America, in academia, through activism on the ground. Teachers are doing this work. And I hope to see it continue, to be honest, and something that will take, that will really make a huge splash after the election as well.
Liz.
You were right, Kelly, when you talked about Sojourner Truth, and I could go through a list of African-American women, Ida B. Wells. You have members of sororities and Black sororities at the turn of the century who marched in the suffrage march and helped white women get the right to vote, and they would not live to see the right to vote in 1965, where their daughters and granddaughters were able to receive the gifts of their burdens. It was 1937 when Zora Neale Hurston, which I think everyone should read this book, Their Eyes Are Watching God, mentioned that Black women were the mules of the world. And you're hearing this theme reemerge in political advocacy world, that we often do the back-breaking work, the justice work, the show up and show out. Black women are the most consistent voting bloc, and there's data for the Democratic Party. In 2016, when Hillary was winning, it wasn't that everyone loved Hillary. I went to Wellesley, Hillary went to Wellesley, and there was this energy around Hillary, but Black women voted 96% for Hillary. They knew what was at stake, not only for themselves and their families, but for the entire country. And you're right, Kelly, to say that when you help those that are the least among us, we all benefit and receive value from that. And so for me, we have challenges even here in Massachusetts being heard in our own party, because often we're doing the back-breaking work of electing people to office. There's a great book out there for color girls, who's considered politics, and talking about all the Black women, Donna Bazile and other folks, who have been in the back rooms, who have been strategists. And so we carry this torch from the beginning of time, from slavery on, to being able to sort of voice our concerns and push the agenda, but we're not recognized. And so oftentimes, so now the tide is turning where folks are saying, it's not enough for us to keep getting other people elected into office. It is time for us to be elected. And you do see from the PTA, from the town meetings to the select boards, school committees, I have seen, after running, I've had a dozen women call me saying, hey, Liz, you did it. I'm going to run next year for city council. And I am just blown away that we have finally stuck our foot in the ground to say, we've been here, we've been the mules, and now we're stepping out and saying no more. And I think it's a lost opportunity when folks tokenize and use Black women or people of color, knowing that their love for freedom and justice and democracy leads them to vote in one particular way. For the most part, we are not a monolith, and that is correct that you said that. But majority, we are thinking about ways in which we can help our immigrant brothers and sisters, how we can create economic and housing policy that keeps us in our communities and feeding our families. And working on maternal justice is something that I work on, where Black women are dying. In Massachusetts, the best state with the hospitals and the sciences, 2 times the rate of white women, and across the country, 4 to 8 times that of white women. We've been here, and I just want to encourage folks to realize that we don't want to be tokenized anymore. I think that that's the message that I'm hearing from our new congresswomen, from AOC, from Presley, from Hayes, that, you know, we're smart enough, we belong, we're here to contribute in a real way because we've been contributing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I want to clear up a myth about Black voters. They're typically thought of, again, as voting in a bloc and liberal. And what they are, in fact, as very much evidence in a new book that everybody should read, which is called Steadfast Democrats, is pragmatic voters.
Mm-hmm.
So it turns out that Black voters assess the field of who is going to get me closer to meeting the needs of my community. And if that be Doug Jones in the moment versus a Roy Moore, these are two people that ran against each other in Alabama, and Judge Roy Moore was alleged to be a pedophile, actually, and had some other racist issues. And Doug Jones was not that. Black women voters and other voters supported that, said that we got to give it all to Doug Jones because we can't afford to have Judge Roy Moore in this position in the Senate. And so we have a situation now, of course, that Doug Jones has made it into Congress, and he's being targeted, actually, by the Koch brothers, who want to use him, and Joe Manchin, who is another kind of maybe moderate white Democrat, to peel him off from the Democrats so they will support Judge Amy Coney Barrett's nomination. So it's very interesting how all this works. But the point is that Black voters and Black women are pragmatic voters. And I want you both to speak to that because their overarching connection is really about what is at stake for their lives and their communities. And that's what drives it. And the new research that is out now in Steadfast Democrats really underscores this. And when it comes down to racism, that's where most Black folks are voting, you know, as a bloc to try to oppose that. Kelly.
Yeah, I will say that unfortunately, most Black women have not had to vote for the person who has their best interest at heart, but for the person who they believe will do the least harm, the least amount of harm. And that's just
Pragmatic.
So, but you know, it's not always like, oh, he's gonna win for us. It's we won't get killed. You know, this might not go well. We might not get our needs particularly met, but we won't die. You know, and so I think in a lot of ways that is what you know, the Democratic Party has been, which is why Black women have to constantly hold their feet to the fire, you know, to remind people like, listen, we can go in another direction. You know, it's I think that one of the things that is so disappointing, I think, about party politics is that if we're honest, neither party has really been progressive. Neither party has really put Black interests at the forefront. And neither party has really made significant, rapid strides in terms of how we understand liberation, ultimate liberation. But I will say this, that, you know, in a lot of ways, it is about being able to stop the bleeding. And so when you have something like COVID-19, where Black people and brown people and indigenous people are being killed at exponential rates, we need people who can come in and stop the bleeding and stop the dying. And so I think it is, you know, unfortunate that the only way I think we can get more progressive leadership is if we be that leadership. And so, you know, I'm grateful for people like Liz and people like Ayanna Pressley, because I see that Black women have taken up the position where it's like, no, we're no longer voting for these people. We are becoming these people, and you can vote for us. And so I think that that is a new shift that we're seeing, is that there are more and more people that have been just regular folks. I mean, I think about the moms, Trayvon Martin's mother and Jordan Davis's mother, who used their horrible tragedies to then run for office. Even Mike Brown's mother, who ran for office, albeit not successfully, but that's not the point, is that they see themselves as their own saviors, instead of waiting for the party to do it for them, be that Democrat or Republican.
Liz?
I'll be short here, but I think because I spent a lot of time talking about this in my other comment, but I think that what we are seeing here is voters who want the space and the capacity to determine their own destiny. You know, that we think about voting, if we think about it as a transactional thing, then it becomes just about going to the polls and then coming back to your community, having filled out a paper and circled in a black dot, right? But if it's about civic engagement and building community power, you see that voting is a part of a bigger movement building agenda. And that's why BLM has actually centralized the idea of registering people, educating voters, ensuring that they get out to the polls. Wherever there is a voter suppression, you have Black Voters Matter Coalition that's been working really hard. And the founder's actually at Harvard right now, sharing her beautiful seeds of knowledge around sort of the pulling together and the mobilization and organizing of people going out to vote for their interests. And so I think that this piece around pragmatic nature is the idea of that for so long we didn't have the tools, or we're not allowed to stand firm and center in determining our destinies. And we want people to stand by our sides. You know, Black women are encouraging. I saw in the Q&A, there was a question around Black men. And sometimes when you have righteous anger, sometimes when you feel that you are not being counted or listened to, or that the policies at the federal and state level are increasingly structurally racist and anti sort of your sort of, someone say growth or survival, folks just stood out and said, I'm not going to vote, you know, and we can't afford that. They're depending, you know, folks when they're doing their campaigns are depending that not only that people show up, but they're depending on some people not showing up. And so I want to encourage all people, regardless of where you stand on this line of, you know, red or blue, to go out, because it is counting yourself in to a process where you're participatory. And I think that's an important piece around looking at this. I think we have to expand this conversation beyond voting. This is actually, I was a community organizer and President Obama was too, and I loved Obama, but Obama also deported more people than many presidents in our recent past. And so what we have is that, you know, there are people that are Black but are from different countries who are naturalized here, people who represent different faiths, and they look at voting very differently than most Americans do, because they're sort of looking at what is going to actually move the agenda for my said group or subject, my subject, I can't even speak today, but my sort of, my section of society forward. And so you're right to say that it's very pragmatic, but I think it's about even bigger than that, about determining our destinies. And we can't lose hope. And I think that that's been the most powerful thing that I've heard from Vice President, potentially Kamala Harris, is that there are difficulties. We are in a triple pandemic, but that if we lose hope, then we stand on the sidelines, and we need to be at the front lines of this historic election this year.
So a question to both of you. What's the charge to Wellesley College students or young people in general? In this moment, you know, as we're talking about Black lives and Black votes.
I always encourage my students to be student activists. And when I say student activists, I'm not talking about like go out and get arrested, right? I mean, act on what you know. Act on what you know. You are at this, you know, prestigious institution, and you have access to so much knowledge don't just sit on that. Like, take the knowledge that you're getting, the wisdom you're getting from your professors, and act on that, and let that inform not just how you vote, but what you purchase, and where you work after you leave here, and your hiring practices after you leave here, and where you put your kids in school should you have them. You know, like, all of these choices that we make in life, particularly as adults when we, you know, graduate college, are based off some sort of knowledge or information, or lack thereof. So take that information that you have and act on it. Be a student activist and be committed to justice. Be committed to helping the marginalized and the oppressed. Toni Morrison said it best, like, when you get these great jobs and you get these, you know, prestigious awards, you help someone else. This isn't, she calls it, this is not a grab bag candy game, like, but that you lift and climb. You lift and climb. You know, when we think about who is still left at the bottom, our goal is to not just get to a destination and then shut the door. Our goal is to constantly lift and climb and bring others along. And if that's how I can encourage students, that's the number one way that I do it.
Okay,
You know, I
Liz.
have a very interesting, you know, because I'm a former Wellesley student here, and you know, when I got to Wellesley, you know, I was, you know, it was the first time that I had seen a Black woman whose father and mother were doctors and lawyers. And when people asked me where I went to school, and I said that John G. O'Brien, which is an exam school in Boston that's really, really good, folks were like, I've never heard of it. You know, I went to Exeter or Phillips Andover, and Miss Porter's boarding school. And it was a life-changing experience for me coming from a public school. I had to work 2 jobs throughout my history at Wellesley. And, you know, for much of my work and time there, I struggled with my sense of belonging. And it wasn't until my junior year where I started being very active in Ethos, and I worked at Harambe House, and I was an RA, and I did all these things because I felt like I needed to contribute more to the college community. And I would take dozens of women on my campus to my community, because often when I took the bus into Boston every weekend to visit my family, I would take the shuttle to MIT, Harvard, or BU, then take the #1 bus to Roxbury, and then take another bus home. I would often hear things negatively about Roxbury. And I was devastated when I'd be on the bus ride back and people would talk about my community being unsafe or not clean, or looking at my community like that we were savages. And I would say to myself, here I am at this place with them, and they don't even know that there's a Roxbury girl on this bus, and can I do something about it? The thing that I want to encourage to Wellesley women is that when I looked up at those signs that said women who will during my time at Wellesley, I took it literally. Women who will make a difference in the world. If you are not going to vote at home, register here in Massachusetts if you're here for more than 8 months out of the year and this is your community. The same way we hold signs for Boston Marathon voters. I know we're in a pandemic, but can you make calls? Can you knock and run? Can you leaflet? Can you put up posters? Can you sign up to be a poll worker? It is paid here in Boston to be a poll worker. Can you translate? Can you give rides? I think folks feel very sort of stuck on what can I really do? Can I contribute? And you can contribute a lot by not being a bystander. And I know that folks are saying, you know, I'm in government and, you know, we're preparing for a second wave with COVID and it's a scary time. But if you can go out to dinner with your friends and remove that mask when you're sitting at that table, you surely can wear a mask and protect yourself and be able to help other people who need you to be a part of their process. And so my manifesto is be a woman who will, and I say that in the full spectrum of women, not just women who are heterosexual, but Wellesley has a rich history of trans women that thinking about that the reproductive rights are on the line. Immigration rights are on the line. We can think about housing policy, educational policy. Whatever your issue is, you can find a lane in there in educating voters across where you go to school and also where you live in our home. So do something, and do something meaningful, and don't sit in just your dorm room and watch this election unfold before your eyes.
Okay, we have some questions and I want you to get to. We'll try to get through as many as we can. What do you think will be the most successful Black vote mobilization efforts, initiatives in the run-up to November's, well now, presidential election? We have less than 30 days.
Vote early, vote by mail, start to strategize. I ensured that there was a voting location and early voting in my community because people in my community are not going to City Hall. And so it was important to have somewhere in Dorchester and Roxbury where people could vote. And so I think that that's the most important strategy, is that reach non-traditional voters by ensuring that they have all the tools that they need if they wish to vote by mail, wish to vote early. And if they're going to vote on November 3rd, what is their voting plan? Most parents are at home teaching their children. And so that's going to be a challenge. Normally folks would vote sort of 7 to 9 a.m., maybe on their lunch break. But you're going to see a lot of voters vote after 4 p.m. And if that's the case, and we can't count on it not being cold, not raining, you got to get people to the polls earlier. And I think that that's the most effective strategy.
I'm echoing. Echo, vote early, mailing your ballot, and then keep yourself as healthy as possible. I'm battling the cold right now, but like, wash your hands, wear a mask, social distance, like keeping yourself healthy so that you can vote and get others to vote is so important.
Someone asked what's the title and author of the book about pragmatic voting. It's called Steadfast Democrats. It's by Cheryl Laird. She has a co-author, I'm sorry, I can't remember it. And there's a colon at the end of Steadfast Democrats, but it will explain a lot of some of what we've been talking about. How do we ensure that the power Black women bring to the table doesn't get co-opted by the Democratic Party's corporate interests?
That's a good question. We keep fighting, and we don't allow that to happen by bringing as much voice and volume as we possibly can. I think social media is a great tool for that. You can hold people accountable. You can show receipts, you know what I mean? And so I remember, Biden, when you said X or Y or Z, roll the tape, you know, like you can do that with social media. And I think Black women have been awesome at making sure, you know, we hold people accountable to make sure that we are not forgotten about should our chosen, you know, person get elected.
I am a white suburban boomer age Wellesley graduate. I've been writing letters for Vote Forward this year as an activity I believe is both useful and safe for me in this age of COVID. What else could I do to support the efforts of Black Lives Matter?
You know, one of the things that when I talked about representation, you know, we had a lot of corporations. We even had government officials saying that BLM mattered to them. And folks were saying, they were showing those receipts and actually invoices and saying, well, actually, no, you don't have diverse boards. You don't have diverse leadership in your C-suite. When you talk about government, there are 351 towns and cities in Massachusetts. 80% of them are 80% white. And so what we have is that we don't have the diversity and the infiltration that we actually need to carry out the agenda. And so I would say that I would work very fervently to try to diversify your school committees, diversify your local political representation, trying to change the sort of narrative that, you know, Black people are not in your communities because they're everywhere in Massachusetts. Although there are 20 minority majority towns here in the Commonwealth, only 10 of them have a person of color who is representative who's a representation of that demographic. And so there's a lot you can do, but I want to thank you for doing that, what you do. When I sit in my office, I get letters from women all the time about supporting the Roe Act or supporting environmental justice. And they don't look like me and they're not from my community, but they're telling me to keep fighting. And that is an important strategy. That's an important role or lane to have. And so I think if you're gonna be home and be safe, phone banking, looking at sort of thinking about how you actually inspire and mobilize other people in your community and in your families to go out to vote and not sit on the sidelines is an important strategy.
Did you want to add anything, Kelly?
No, that's good.
Okay, all right. Now, one survey found 64% of Black women voted in 2016, but only 54% of Black men. What can Black women do to increase the turnout of Black men in 2020? I'm not sure where those numbers came from, but I do know exactly what happened on the Democratic side. 93% of Black women voted on the Democratic side for Hillary Clinton. And there were 8% of Black men that voted for now President Trump. So there is that. But the question was, what do Black women do to increase the turnout of Black men in 2020?
And I just want to say that this is the muling effect, like Black women are supposed to lift everybody. I think Black men need to be mobilized to mobilize other Black men. I think locally, our Sheriff, Steve Tompkins, just recently had a forum about Black men and voting to encourage some of the Black male leaders in our community to reach out. I think it's a lack of information. When I talked about returning citizens not knowing that they had the right to vote, here in Massachusetts, many of them just didn't know. They didn't know where their polling location was. They had never voted before. And if they had voted, they voted in 2008 for Barack Obama. And here in Massachusetts, they voted to legalize marijuana because they had been so criminalized over the last few decades around cannabis that they were just really trying to make it legal here in the Commonwealth to expand their economic opportunities and their freedoms. I think that this is a place where Black women can support, but I think we need to have the brothers talking to the brothers. And it's up to Biden also and Harris to make that translation, or to President Trump, to this demographic. I think that they're not speaking directly to them. And I think that it's up to them to make sure that the message is clear.
Mm-hmm. If I could also just be real, just a little bit, like patriarchy is real. Like, if we think that Black men have not bought into patriarchy and have not bought into these ideas about women in subordination, I just don't think that that's true. And I think we have to do a better job to being in conversation with our Black men and letting them know, listen, this hurts us. This hurts your mother. This hurts your daughters. This hurts your sisters. And this is bad practice. And really pushing back on those ideas of sexism that really hurt all of us.
Okay, we're going to do lightning rounds because we're running out of time, but I just want to squeeze in as many as I can. I'm an alum class of 74 with many Black Wellesley friends and 4 Black children. I am white, as it happens. I've heard that Black voters are not happy with Biden choosing Kamala Harris because it's seen as a way to buy Black votes. What do you think?
I don't think Biden had a choice. I think he knew who he put him on office, and he had to have a woman of color, and in particular a Black woman, as his VP pick. I don't think yet. I think there would have been outrage if he picked someone, particular white male or even a white woman. Even though I really like Elizabeth Warren, I do think that there would have been outrage.
I actually haven't heard that, but I think that's really interesting that you say that. And I think it was a critically important and pivotal moment to bring back some of the voters of the past, to see a Democratic candidate that was viable, that wasn't who they were leaning for.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, in all the polls from Black women who were polled, who were voters, it came down to Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren. All right. In your experience, what is the most effective way to address misinformation around BLM? And for that matter, around lots of issues, science, racism, history. I want to believe people can be receptive and educated. Thank you for hosting this inspirational event. Quick.
I think people will believe what they want to believe. I've really sort of in my practice recently stopped trying to, for a better word, get people on my side on the way that I look at police accountability, that I look at public safety in this country, and the history of violence, or even other issues. People are going to not like BLM if they don't like, you know, the idea of sort of this movement for Black lives, you know? And so what I try to do is not a hate group. I try to spend my time on social media spreading information that is actually current. It is factual, it is not fake news, to be able to combat that. But we have a society that is, there are people that are determined to not believe in the BLM movement. And here is an important piece. Because I am pro-Black does not mean I'm anti-white. And that's an important thing for white, I think white people to understand, that this moment of reckoning in the last couple of years after Ferguson, there have been over 1,000 people killed each year due to police violence in this country, predominantly Black. And so you have a people that are finally standing up and celebrating their cultural heritage, their beauty, and recognizing that they also are American. They also deserve to be respected and not killed, right, in police custody. And so what we have is that there's this tenuous moment in history where people are like, but I'm pro-police and I'm pro the people in my community. Well, I have lots of law enforcement in my family and community, and I still don't want to die at the hands of police. You know, that it's not choosing one or the other. You can be pro-equity and justice, pro-uplifting a race of a people that have not felt that same recognition as you have, without denouncing your cultural identity.
Okay. All right. And we're done. We're out of time. I will note that there is a question here about a suggestion for a 12-year-old girl watching this who wants to be more involved in the BLM movement and obviously can't vote. Please contact Color of Change or What Matters BLM or Electoral, any of those Black Lives Matter organizations would be happy to talk to you. They're all of mine. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you both, Professor Kelly Carter-Jackson and the fabulous Representative Liz Miranda. Thank you.
Vote, people.
Thank you. Vote. Wash your hands and wear your mask.
Black folks. Thank you so much.